In Imperator Rome, there are three main different types of government that you will see. There's the republics, and there's different forms of republics, such as oligarchic, aristocratic, for example. There's monarchies, and again, there's different forms of monarchies, aristocratic, autocratic. And there's tribes, such as settled tribes and migratory tribes. All three of these governments create very different types of play styles. There's a couple more other variances, as well as some very specific ones, such as the imperial cult here, which you can form with divine sanction. That's actually a kind of monarchy. And there's empires, which are also a kind of monarchy. So what every different variant of a government does, so these titles like, having an imperial cult, having an empire versus having an autocratic monarchy, an aristocratic republic, an oligarchic republic, those variants, this is where they make a difference right here. It's what ideas you have, as well as some minor bonuses. You can find all these bonuses on the wiki. What I want to cover today is more the functions of each government type, what they are, how they work, and maybe how to play them. But this is the actual difference between variant. Picking a variant is really up to you. I wouldn't say any one of these variants is the best. Really, it depends on how you're playing the game and who you're playing the game as. If you ever want to change your government type, you can do that to some extent. For example, as a republic, we can enact different types of republics here and swap between them for some cost, mind you. Monarchies can do the same. And tribes can advance into being republics or monarchies. Once you are a republic or monarchy, you cannot swap to being the other, sort of. Republics can become imperial cults, which are technically monarchies, and they can also form empires, which are technically monarchies. So, in that way, you can form a monarchy, but you can't form the normal types of monarchies, the ones that we're seeing literally everywhere in the world. And then monarchies have no way at all of becoming a republic or a tribe. When you're at the monarchy, that's essentially either your beginning of the game or your end game, if you get that far. So, let's start with republics and how they work. Here we have the government screen for a republic. You see, as Rome here, we have two different leaders. This is normal. This is how they worked. Here we could see the average ruler popularity between these two co-consuls, these two co-leaders of the republic. The popularity is not insanely important, realistically, for a republic. I'd say the republic is the easiest government type to play in the entire game, but the hardest to excel at. Because when it comes to a republic, a lot of things happen. You see, there's an election. There's also a dictatorship. We'll talk about that later. But there's an election by default where these two leaders get picked. As you see, they're from the same party, and there's three different parties here. This election will determine who you play as, because you're playing as the country. You're not playing as the characters. This is not Crusader Kings. And so when we look at your characters, you see, based on the size of your nation, you have these different families. And as a republic, you're going to be swapping between them repeatedly, because also their members are going to be split between the different political parties. You're going to end up as a different family all the time, meaning you don't have to worry that much about characters, and it would in fact be kind of hard to invest into them, because you might find yourself investing into, say, this family or one specific party, and then find yourself as a different family and a different party next, and you've kind of just hurt yourself. That's what makes republics very easy to get into, is that you don't have to micromanage all these characters. You don't have to excel at them. However, excelling with them, if you want to, is that much more difficult due to how the election system works. Your characters will almost certainly end up worse than the characters of a well-maintained monarchy. For example, we also have corruption here. This is always important to leaders all the time, because it's bad. It affects everything. Loyalty of your co-consul and his power base is important, because you, the consul, and your co-consul may butt heads. There's entire event chains dedicated to this, and as a republic, with elections especially, this will happen a lot. Right here, you can see basically the next election. You can see who the next consul and co-consul are projected to be, what families they're from, if they're from one at all, and also you can see what party that they're from, if they're from one at all. And you could see the next date of the election, as well as additional information. This can help you if you're trying to plan. Now, the leaders are, by default, not really the most important part of a republic. That's the whole thing about the elections, right? What is the most important and most difficult thing that a newer player will experience that you have to deal with is the Senate here. And so here we have our representation of the Senate. You have the three different parties. In this case, they are named the Optimates, the Boni, and the Populares. Each of these will exist in every republic in the game, just under different names. The Optimates have a description, and again, these will exist in every republic of every game, just under a different name. I want to stress that. They're the elite of our nation, and that they are. These are the rich, these are the wealthy, these are what you might think of when you think of leaders. The upper class is represented here. The Boni, these are the traditionalists. They are in the middle, but slightly off on their own political option. These ones don't like rash actions. They want to balance the needs of everybody, but thus are kind of like real life moderates today, where you don't share the beliefs of either of them, so you're not actually liked equally by both of them. You're hated equally by both of them. And that's kind of how that works. You can see down here you have their goals, and we'll talk more about that in a second. The Populares, this is your average person. This is the populists. This is the individual that stands up and says, I'm going to stand up for the average person. These are the communist scum. And I don't mean that they're literally communists. I mean, they are communist scum. This is what you think of when you think of someone standing up, rallying the people, and destroying your nation with them. Now, I'm not just being biased towards this party. You will hate this party. This party is bad. This party will counter everything that you can be as a republic. Popular generals and corrupt politicians have a tendency to join this party as it lets them toss aside ancient traditions that might negatively affect their own rise to power. Their goal is to reduce the influence of the Optimates, the elite. You see here they have a goal right now to pass a law, the Centuriate Assembly Law. This would just grant them more power, essentially. They claim to stand up for the modern, the average man, but they are power hungry. And if they get power, you won't have it. Because as far as it goes, being a consul, you are essentially one of these two, if not both. Usually, the Optimates are the ones that are going to make your life the easiest. This game features a ton of random events, and you'll get to see the flavor really there the most. Everything that hurts your nation is going to be a populist thing. The traditionalists will often just kind of be in their own corner, and the Optimates will always push for the things that help the nation the most. Now, this comes with a downside. You see here, their agenda is to get 5 holdings handed out to them. A holding is essentially just a little invisible estate spread throughout different territories. It grants influence to individuals, and if you granted them this, you'd get approval for them. That's the main reason of doing these objectives. They can't technically do them. They can prompt you to do them, but if you do them on your own, you're going to gain approval with these political parties. The agenda of the ruling party, the party that has the majority, is always put up here because it always, number one, has the most effect if you're trying to earn popularity with the ruling party, but also the ruling party can just straight up try to force through their agenda. And this would happen in terms of like a pop-up that prompts you to either allow them to get what they want, which in this case, it's not really that bad of a thing. Sometimes it could be depending on who's in charge and exactly what pops up. But you can also say no and just lose a lot of approval of the ruling party. And you need their approval. You do need their approval of just everybody in general, but namely whoever has the most power, and I pray for you if it's the populists that control the Senate. Because up here, we have support in the Senate. Support in the Senate affects your ability to do anything as a republic. As a republic, you need at least 50% of the Senate to support you. Now, that's just not mean to have like, oh, well, I can have like 100%. of, say, this one and then less of the others, because look right here. This is the amount of control they have in percentages. The Optimates have 58%. They support us 50%. The Boni have 31%. They support us 50%. The Populace have 11%. They support us 50%. If you need a visual representation of that, that's what all this is. These are all the seats of the Senate, and this is who holds them. The Optimates control everything, which, in my opinion, is usually the best. The Boni come up next, and then the Populares. A amazing start for someone that's trying to expand and have a strong nation. The amount of the Senate that is controlled is really just up to their influence of the characters that are in the party. As you see here, the Consul of Rome is here, as well as other very influential individuals are part of this party. As you hover over this, you see the Boni have some pretty influential ones, and the Populares, they have a number of individuals here, but not a lot of influential ones. You don't have a whole lot of control over who ends up where, but through character interactions, you can go ahead and find ways to execute or expel, assassinate, you name it, your rivals in other parties if you really want one party to continue to hold maximum power. That is possible. Additionally, you can pay a different cost of resources to simply earn the loyalty and the approval of certain political parties immediately and also over time. Down here with each of these buttons, see the Optimates want you to be a little tyrannical, cost political influence. All these will cost political influence. The Boni will require money, and the Populace will require manpower, making the Populace the easiest to get the approval of by far. Manpower usually is pretty easy to get, but tyranny also goes away pretty quickly. Money's probably the hardest thing to do here. Regardless, you pick these based on your needs, based on who's in power and what you want. These also have other buffs and debuffs that you have to deal with. The Boni are not a good choice if you're trying to integrate or keep happy other cultures that are not your own. The Optimates are not a good choice for the happiness of the freemen. And the Populares are not a good choice for the happiness of the nobles. There's a couple other standout things. For example, the Boni, like, they have an extra buff, the integrated culture happiness, because the others have, for example, the Optimates make the head of every great family, which I showed you earlier, have a little more loyalty for the extent of this button press. And the Populares allow you to bypass Senate approval on your next decision that requires it, which is very obvious when you don't have 50%. You go to make any decision, it'll say, oh, you're lacking this amount of Senate approval, so you get tyranny, and that's kind of the effect. Now, let's look at that. If we go to laws, this is the main place you'll see it, but it affects everything, including declaring war, making alliances. Everything, basically, that you do will have to be run by the Senate. If you have 50% or higher, they will always support it. Otherwise, you're forcing it through and you become tyrannical. So every time you see here, it's actually, it's 51%. Less than 51% support, get a little bit of tyranny because you need that majority. You see, and the less Senate support you have, the worse the debuff. And just to show you, we go click on Etruria here. You see, declare war is affected by this at all. Tyranny can be good and it can also be bad, especially for a republic. So it's up to you to decide how much tyranny you want. Just generally maintaining that Senate support is ideal. Notable laws for republics would be the election reforms, which, as you can see here, change how your elections work. You can increase the term of your consul by 5 years. You can reduce it by 3 years. So you're just swapping through characters like crazy. And you can also increase it by 45 years. This one would be the hardest to get because also your leader needs to be a member of the Populares, and there's a couple of other things. And it's also not necessarily ideal either. But there's also one more thing you can do under technology, oratory advances. On the right side here, you go down this line and you find these two options: demand and request a line of succession. What this does is it changes your government to dictatorship. Now you're essentially a republic without an election. Whoever becomes elected will be elected for life. To request it is pretty brutal. A lot of stability, political influence, tyranny as well. And you become corrupt because, of course, you're becoming a dictatorship. That's crazy. And you need the Populares to be doing pretty well. This is a very, I think, niche option to go for because of that. And bypassing that is demand a line of succession, where you simply fight a large civil war, remove all those other debuffs instead, and if you win, you become a dictatorship. So, as you see, you have a lot of options on how to play a republic, and a lot of them can be vastly different, interacting with the Senate and whatnot. There's a lot of things a very experienced player could do with a republic, but it's also very easy for a new player to settle into a republic. But let's look at monarchies next. Now we booted up Macedon, we have a monarchy. You can see the information provided here is pretty much the same. The only difference I would add is, well, let's point out that your co-consul is essentially your wife. Your wife's stats will add to your own, kind of like CK, helping you rule the country. And so it's important to pick a good wife. Your ruler popularity is independent now, separate from your wife. Your wife doesn't have to be popular, she's your wife. But your ruler popularity is very important, because we don't have Senate approval here, we have legitimacy, which you can find here, and you can find here. It's one thing, and it takes forever to raise it, compared to raising Senate approval, which can be pretty fast and pretty fluid. So this is a much different play style already. There's this one button that you can press here to increase legitimacy if it's under 100%. It has a small political influence cost, and its effects are very gradual, very akin to using something like Divine Sacrifice or Invoke Devotio, but for the stability of your government. You can see from having maxed out legitimacy, the effects are that our primary heir is more attractive to others in the nation, and our freemen become happier. There are increasing debuffs as this number gets lower and lower. At the bottom here, you can see the line of succession and pretenders. You see here 1,000, 999, 998. These are the very high values of our children. Because right now, if you look at our laws, we have an agnatic primogeniture. Basically, the eldest son inherits the throne, and that's what comes first. Our first son comes first, then second, then third. If the first two sons die, it'll default to the third son. If they all die, it'll support to, say, a pretender, such as the brother of the ruler here. He's the one that came up. Down here, you could see all the supporters of an heir. You want them all to support your primary heir, of course. If anybody ever doesn't, it will alert you up here. And then you could go to their character screen, and there will be an option here to simply demand that they support your heir, and it will give you some tyranny, which again, it's not too bad in moderation. In excess, it could be pretty bad. There is, of course, also the different other succession laws you can have. A cognatic primogeniture would allow female children to succeed the throne if there's no valid male heirs. This is a little safer. There's the agnatic seniority, where it'll instead favor the younger brothers rather than your sons. But, you know, this comes with its own problems as well. There's elective monarchy, which would make your monarchy play a lot more like a republic. This is the closest you get to being a republic as a monarchy. Basically, all those supporters will vote on the most popular person to be the next leader. It means legitimacy won't really matter as much. Forming a new government with elective succession won't be quite as traumatic, especially if you have something like a lower legitimacy. It won't affect you nearly as much, but the benefits of a monarchy become muted as well as you mimic having a republic. And finally, we have familial marriage. This is the Egyptian way of ruling. Basically, it will favor your eldest child. Your gender does not matter. And rather, you pull the Austro-Hungarian route, right? Where, you know, the Habsburgs, where you're just marrying your siblings. You'll only really be able to marry off your children to their siblings and whatever. This can result in some problems, of course, but this is like just normal monarchy on crack when it comes to the benefits that you can gain by keeping things, well, within the family. If for whatever reason changing your succession law is not an option to salvage your failing monarchy with an heir that you really don't want to be the heir for whatever reason, another option is to simply press anoint. This will designate someone an heir regardless of your laws, so long as he's on this small list right here. You could pick. They gain a lot of succession value, but you'll lose a quarter of your total maximum legitimacy for this. And as I mentioned, this takes a long time to get up. Way longer than Senate support. And whenever your leader dies, this shit goes way the fuck down until your new leader recovers it. So, and it's not as dramatic again with elective succession, but be very careful. Monarchies are way more about the long game, as opposed to republics, which are about the short game, unless you go for elective succession, of course. I didn't really explain these during Republic because most of them were generic and not really very relevant to ruling the country. I mean, having popularity from holding games as a republic and a monarchy could be important. Patronizing the arts is not very important, but this is particularly important for a monarchy, which is demand oaths of allegiance, which is kind of like going ahead and demanding and gaining tyranny on a one-to-one basis, but instead you pay in political influence and your primary heir simply just becomes more attractive to everybody. Now, hopefully you don't have to use this, but I figured I'd point that one out because, well, it's important. If you played CK, then you'll be familiar on how monarchies work, and if you like CK, you might want to pick a monarchy based off that. A republic, I'm not sure, but maybe that's more in line with, say, playing Victoria. Maybe, that's maybe stretching it. But then we have the final type of government here. I picked Arvernia for this. This is the tribe. The tribal government type here, which as you can see, we have another different screen. As a tribe, you will have different clan chiefs in place of having heirs, in place of having Senate support. The clan chiefs are the leader. They're the leaders of your great family. So you have these in the other government types, and they have importance. They definitely do. But in this one, they are your Senate. They are your successors. And so they are who you want to keep happy. This is another government type where you could potentially find yourself swapping families, because as you see, the leader, who's by himself, by the way, currently, but that's just because he's not married, is one of these. It's this one right here. And you have succession support. And so you can see who can take over. Playing a tribe is pretty brutal. Your capability to research is not even remotely close to monarchies and republics, and that's why it's a whole thing for you to go out of your way to form a republic or something else, which is done with certain decisions. For example, investigate tribal reform. This is how you would move on to being a monarchy or republic. But I picked a federated tribe. This would be the same for a settled tribe. We can also go back to becoming a migratory tribe. This is a little different than just changing government types like those other ones, like variants, because the migratory tribe can actually, they have a special ability to simply pick up all their shit and move somewhere else that's uninhabited, like all this white space here. So if you want to play a really extreme tribe, migratory is the thing to do. Just late game, you might not be too viable. Centralization listed here is your main influencer of whether or not you will want to become more migratory or if you'll want to become more settled, because it gives bonuses if it gets higher to research points, pop promotion, and your civilization level. But the higher your civilization level, the worse of a barbarian you are and can be. You're training one set of perks for others. Even down to your military, this government type changes everything. Because the leader of these clans, they're the ones that are going to lead your militaries as they acquire things that they're in charge of. But there's also, you could just have other governors that are separate. But generally, you know, having those guys in charge of stuff is pretty important, and they'd wield a lot more influence in the process as well. If you want to gain more centralization, well, that's actually fairly easy, but it's not really made on this screen as a decision. You can affect it a lot in laws. For example, right here, you can increase centralization in exchange for certain benefits, and that's really how it goes for the laws. Rather than simply comparing is one thing worth it, is another thing worth it, it's is the centralization gain or loss worth the bonus? Otherwise, you're just having no bonus, but no change to either of these. Either way, you have encouraged tribal migration, which basically is you giving up some of your population to lose centralization. This is really up to you, and it really depends on your playstyle, because also your main pop is going to be the tribesmen. Tribesmen are very different than everything else. They produce money and manpower, kind of like a freeman, but they're overall more effective than a freeman, because they're doing the job of a slave and a freeman. I went over this a lot in my buildings guide, but also the buildings you can make are suddenly really different. Things such as the tribal settlement become much more desirable, and everything else starts to become less desirable. Even having cities as a barbarian is not necessarily a desirable thing. unless you are trying to centralize. If you're a migratory tribe, then making infrastructure is certainly your last concern if you're willing to pick up and move somewhere else anyway. If you want to get that Viking aesthetic, you can also assemble raiding parties. It just increases your efficiency at enslavement, you know. So, if you want to go around getting slaves and making the most of them, this is a pretty good way to do it. And this is a pretty good government type to do it as. Due to the tug-of-war nature of this, the lack of viability in the late game as technological prowess continues, and really just the struggle that it would take to catch up to other nations, I'd say this is the hardest government type overall. Not just for a new player to get into, but to make the most of as well. You can certainly make them work, but in my opinion, with equally skilled players playing every government type, the tribe will always lose. Not to mention that if we take a glance at a population map mode, you can kind of tell the areas with tribes also tend to have less population. The monarchy areas and the republic areas tend to have more. And pops in this game are really everything. And those are all the basics of government types, how they work and what makes them different, and what I'd recommend playing and how, that I wanted to go over in this video. If you want to see any more guides on Imperator Rome, let me know in the comments below. If you want to see more in-depth looks at these government types, that can certainly be looked at as well. I hope this was helpful to you, potentially in picking what government type to play in your first playthrough, or just getting a better handle of one that you're already playing. For now though, thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you on another video.